us for our presentation. Oh, recording's going, cool. So thanks for joining us for our presentation on Massachusetts climate legislation and what we can do to make it a reality this year. My name's Ryan. I'm a volunteer from Cambridge, Mass. With the Sierra Club, obviously. And to start, like Jacob said, we want to make this a little interactive. So I'd actually love to hear some intros from people in the chat. If anyone wants to just send us a message saying where you're from, maybe why you're here today, or any fun facts. And yes, as Jacob just said in the chat, we're going to send the slides out after this meeting. Okay, so if we've got some people introducing themselves. A lot of people from the Boston area, especially in this group. So on the next slide, I'll tell you why we're here today. So we're here because we need your help to pass the Massachusetts 100% Clean Energy Act. This is a piece of legislation that would help ensure Mass fully transitions to clean electricity by 2035 and clean energy by 2045. Now, who we are, I know we have a lot of Sierra Club associated people here, but for anyone who doesn't know, the Sierra Club's an environmental advocacy organization with chapters in every US state. The Massachusetts chapter specifically is a grassroots organization that has a small staff and a strong team of volunteers, including most of the presenters today. So a little bit more about us. We're from the Sierra Club Community Outreach Team, and this team's been pretty active over the last 9 months to a year. Our team's focused on educating the public on environmental issues and helping community members to take environmental action. So recently, we've supported some of Sierra Club's endorsed candidates in local elections, spoken out on behalf of environmental legislation in Mass, and most recently raised legislative support for the Massachusetts Omnibus Climate Bill. So our goals today are to share information on the entire Massachusetts legislative process, and specifically on the 100% Clean Energy Act that's in the legislature now. Afterwards, we'll talk about ways you can all get involved to push the Clean Energy Act and other legislation forward. During the presentation, like Jacob said, feel free to send any questions you have to the chat. Obviously, we'll have a Q&A after we wrap up so we can hear more questions from people. So before I hand it off, we're going to have a quick activity. You're about to see a Zoom poll that will list a bunch of ways we can fight climate change. And we want you to pick what you think is the most important or most impactful way.
So we're just going to give it a few minutes for folks to respond. About half the folks responded so far. Almost there.
In the meantime, yeah, I'm just scrolling through the chat here, and it looks like we've got people from all over the place. Lots of greater Boston area, South Shore, further out too. So it's exciting.
We're missing just one person, but I think I'm going to say good enough.
All right, so everyone can see our poll results now. Maybe unsurprisingly, political organizing was our big winner here, which is not to say that that's the only impactful way to fight climate change, but it's what we're going to be focusing on tonight, how individuals can make a difference through politics and the legislative process. So I'll hand it off to Julian now to tell you why this is all important.
Thanks, Ryan. Hello, everyone. My name is Julian Avila, pronounced he, him, his. I am a resident of Quincy, Massachusetts. I have been a volunteer with Sierra Club with the outreach team for about 4 months now. So yeah, I'm really happy that all of you have joined us today. So in the next slide, here we are showing you a plot that some of you may be familiar with, but it just nicely represents the correlation between temperature increases in the last century that are associated with an increase in the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. And what's nice about this plot is it shows us how this increase has quickly accelerated in the last couple of decades. So in the last 20 years, you're seeing a steep increase in both concentration of CO2 as well as global temperature. Next. All right, so it is no secret at this point that increasing global temperature translates into all sorts of ecological outcomes. One of the most relevant here in the New England area is the presence of stronger and more frequent storms. This in particular over here is a personal note for me because it's one of the reasons that motivated me to join Sierra Club as a volunteer. This picture is a storm that hit us in 2018 here in Quincy, Massachusetts. Well, it hit everyone in New England, but it hit us pretty badly here in Quincy. And if you squint really tightly, you'll see that there's a house back there. That's where I used to live. So we were asked to evacuate. And to me, this became a wake-up call that we really needed to act as quickly as possible. Next. But it's not only storms that we're worried about here in New England, and with floodings and coastal erosion. Air quality is an important factor as well. So here I'm showing you a plot where I'm highlighting the gas consumption in the New England area, and the hot spots, the red spots, correlate with high urban, high residential concentration areas. And in the next plot, one of the things that I'm showing you is a study conducted in 2013 where researchers mapped over 3,000 gas leaks in the metropolitan area in Boston. So if you look at where we're using gas and you start thinking about how our grid is aging, it's not surprising that we're releasing tons of methane in the places where we work and the places where we live. And methane is also a contributor to greenhouse effects. So this is one of the reasons why we want to get away from using gas in our cities. And in the next panel, I am showing you the prevalence of asthma in Massachusetts, which is one of the highest in the nation. And within the Commonwealth, there are hotspots. You can see the hotspots here in dark blue. And there's a big one in Springfield, which is kind of asthma capital in the nation. They correlate nicely with the urban areas where we're using a lot of gas. And it may not be necessarily a causal correlation between having a lot of gas usage and the onset of asthma, but it certainly doesn't help to have a high concentration of people who suffer from asthma and have pollution from methane leaking from our pipes, but also methane burning. All right, so in the next slide, we're showing you where emissions in the Commonwealth come from. So I was showing you before that we're burning gas in metropolitan areas, but in reality, there are many sources of pollution in emissions in the state. Transportation seems to top the list over here in the blue line on top. Energy generation is the next line over here. It seems to have dropped in the past couple of years. And then we have residential and commercial energy consumption. All right, next. Great, so now one of the things that we want to do is look at where this energy is coming from. Well, where we're generating electricity from. And if you look at the beginning of where this plot, here on the left, you can see that before we were using kind of equal parts oil, coal, and natural gas. And over the past 20 years, we've transitioned to primarily natural gas, which if you think about is much better than coal and oil, but is not taking us where we want to go for our climate change goals. So this over here, that tiny stretch of solar and other renewables will have to displace natural gas within the next 5, 10, 20 years. One thing I like about this plot is that it illustrates that these changes can happen pretty quickly. So a lot of people just think, well, this is not accomplishable. We cannot switch to electric in 5, 10 years. But if you look at this transition, it happened relatively quickly. It was only like 10, 20 years that we pretty much removed coal completely. Oops, sorry, Ellen, we can hear you. Oh, there we go. Thanks. All right, so next slide. And finally, one of the biggest sources of energy consumption in the Commonwealth is heating our homes. It's no surprise, no secret for anyone here that winters are cold and we need to heat them up. And currently we're using primarily gas to heat our houses. There's still some of these old oil sources of electricity or sources of heating. But the idea behind this bill will also tackle some of these aspects of heating our homes and where our electricity is coming from. And with that, I believe that's the last slide I have. And I'm just going to hand it next to Nicole.
Thanks, Julian. All right, hi everyone. My name is Nicole. My pronouns are she, her. I live in Arlington, and I'm also a volunteer for the community outreach team here with the Massachusetts Sierra Club chapter. The bill we're going to be covering today is the 100% Clean Energy Act. This bill has been endorsed by more than 60 environmental, civic, and business organizations, Sierra Club included, and Mass Power Forward, a statewide coalition of more than 100 organizations, has chosen the bill as one of its top priorities for the 2021 to 2022 session. I hope that after learning a bit more about this bill, you'll also want to support it and try to get your local senators and representatives to as well. We can go next slide. All right, so this bill is being led in the Senate by Joseph Boncore, and he sponsored other bills, including those surrounding air quality, preserving open spaces, transportation, protecting woodlands, and focusing on environmental justice communities. In the House of Representatives, it is being led by Marjorie Decker, who has been a strong environmental leader, speaking out about reducing our carbon footprint and protecting existing environmental legislation. She's also previously co-sponsored amendments to set greenhouse gas reduction targets in Massachusetts, established Environmental Justice Council, and has also filed a bill that aimed to divest state pensions from coal and fossil fuels. This bill is also co-led in the House by Sean Garbali, who has led oil spill legislation, off-highway vehicle regulation, and is currently sponsoring other bills related to regulating fracking, developing water quality improvements, and more. As of last week, 13 out of 40 senators and 64 out of 160 representatives have shown support by co-sponsoring this bill. And our goal with this presentation, and hopefully with the efforts of all of you here today, is to try and target the remaining senators and representatives to rally as much support behind this bill as possible. Next slide. So what exactly is the 100% Clean Energy Act, you might be wondering. There are a couple of major goals and a handful of sub-goals that come with the bill. And the bill is intended to set goals, but it's not specifically laying out how Massachusetts is going to achieve those goals. And so the first goal is, by 2035, 100% of electricity shall be clean electricity, and 80% of the electricity shall be generated by renewable energy. And you might be wondering what the difference is between clean electricity and renewable energy. And the way they define it is that renewable energy is defined as solar, wind, hydroelectric, tidal or ocean, and or fuel cells. And clean electricity is defined as either renewable electricity or electricity generated by another source that emits virtually no greenhouse gases or other harmful pollutants. And in the case of this bill, electricity generated from wood biomass and waste energy are not considered clean electricity. The second goal is, by 2045, 100% of energy used in the building sector and transportation shall be clean energy. And so now clean energy is defined as either clean electricity or non-electric energy from other sources that emit virtually no greenhouse gases. So an example of that might be solar thermal heating or geothermal heating and cooling. And then some of the sub-goals of this bill include, by 2025, all new buildings must be highly efficient and use clean heating technologies. By 2035, all new light-duty vehicles still must be electric, and 30% of new medium and heavy-duty vehicles will be zero-emission vehicles. And lastly, by 2035, all MBTA buses must be electric. So there are a few more sub-goals in this bill, and you can learn a bit more about them by reading the full bill on the Massachusetts Legislature website, which we'll cover a little later on. And if you have questions regarding the bill, I know a few representatives have touched on this before, but feel free to send them in the chat, and at the end we'll have a question and answer session. Next. So one of the things that's important to understand is how these bills are going to be affecting you, and specifically the 100% Clean Energy Act. Oftentimes you might not notice when certain bills get passed because they might not impact you directly at all. But for this bill, there are several ways that it might impact your day-to-day life or your life long-term. So for example, do you own or rent a home? If so, this bill will impact how you choose to heat and power your home, from the type of equipment you install to the overall cost. The intended goal is to reduce energy costs over time as renewable energy becomes more prevalent and continues to get cheaper. Do you drive a car or use public transit? You might be in the market for a new car in the next 10 years. You can go to the next one, Jacob, thanks. Yes, you might be in the market for a car in the next 10 years or so, and there might be more electric car options on the market. And the cost for electric cars will likely begin to go down. Also, if you ride public transit, you'll notice that the buses will be slowly transitioning to electric. Do you live, for example, near a highway, or if you live near a power plant, you might be exposed to an increased amount of air pollution. In the future, with less fossil fuel driven cars and more electric cars, your overall health might improve. And the air around power plants, for example, will become cleaner. Lastly, if you don't necessarily fall into any of these categories, you likely still consume electricity in some shape or form. You might actually see the changes in your daily life. You know, the lights, they'll still turn on. The buses and public transit will still run, but this source of energy will be a lot better for both public health and the health of the planet. You can go next slide. And lastly, just to wrap up on what the 100% Clean Energy Act is and what will happen, there's other opportunities that may present themselves as a result of this bill. As previously mentioned, public health will be greatly impacted as a reduction in both fossil fuel combustion and gas leaks that will provide cleaner air and hopefully result in fewer respiratory illnesses. There will also likely be increase in incentives for energy efficient appliances or electric vehicles, and that will overall have a positive impact on Massachusetts residents financially. There's also the potential for tens of thousands of new jobs as the renewable energy sector continues to grow, which will hopefully result in an overall boom in the economy. And lastly, the long-term impacts, including mitigating the acceleration of climate change for future generations, and it could also hopefully inspire other states who might not have done this already to put forth similar legislation. So this policy is intended to be bold and transformative, and it will really impact everyone. So I'm going to now pass the presentation over to Jacob, who will talk a little bit about the legislative process.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. And just pardon me for a second, I'm doing multitasking here while I do this. So I'm just trying to navigate to all the right stuff. So yeah, so we've talked a little bit about the bigger picture of what the problem is and the legislation. One of the pieces of legislation that we are supporting to as a solution. I'm going to now talk about the process to getting a bill passed. And for folks who are more familiar with lobbying or done some in the past, this might be a little review for you. Maybe there'll be something new in here. Hopefully you'll enjoy it either way. So first of all, I want to talk just for a second about why winning here is significant. And what does it even mean? What does it even mean to win? The first piece is around accountability. So folks may or may not have heard that the governor is doing a planning process to get to net zero emissions by mid-century. And the state has recently also passed a climate law that set up a bunch of really big picture emissions goals, okay? This bill allows us to set some firm accountability standards for our state government and ensure that they're carrying out on the promises to reduce our emissions, and also making sure that the way we reduce emissions is being done equitably, meaning that the people who are most historically impacted by pollution are also receiving a lot of the benefits of the transition to renewable energy, all the jobs that Nicole was talking about, and other things as well, access to cheaper power. And if another administration were to come in the future, another governor who wanted to reverse some of the work of Governor Baker or Governor Patrick, this law would prevent that from happening. It would really put some clear-cut guidance on how we reduce emissions. And so the second piece of this is around building momentum. So Massachusetts is a leader state. We've been a leader state for a long time. First state to pass gay marriage. Before Obamacare was Obamacare, it was Romneycare. And what we do here in Massachusetts is going to ripple across the country. So even if a partial win here, even if we don't get all of the bill into law, will signal to other states that Massachusetts wants to seriously double down on its commitment to renewable energy. And then even generating discussion. So even, even in a worst case scenario where we're not able to pass the laws we want to do, we're continuing to build support for robust climate policy and equitable solution to the climate crisis in the coming years. Okay. Oops, did I go past a slide? I did. So the legislative process. This is the part that might be a bit review. So in Massachusetts, we have a 2-year legislative cycle. It began in January 5th of this year, and it typically ends the end of July of the even year, so July 2022. So right now we are just getting into the meat of it. The bills have been filed. Most bills have been assigned to committees, where the committees will review the bills. They will do that for a little less than a year. Typically, the deadline for bills to be reviewed is February of 2022. And in between now and then, bills will receive a public hearing. Some bills will move forward, some bills won't. So we really have between now and February of next year to move this bill forward. And sometime in that time frame, there'll be a public hearing on this bill. That's the one thing we know for sure. And if a bill does not become law by the end of legislative session, so at the end of July 2022, we basically have to start all over again. And a quick side note, because of COVID this past year, the session was actually extended. It went until the end of, actually the beginning of January. It went until like January 4th, as opposed to July. So quite a bit longer because of the emergency. It's not clear if that's going to happen again, but traditionally the session ends July 2022. Okay, so hopefully that was a clear process. If you are looking to follow things closely, if you want to know when public hearings are coming up, you want to see who sponsored this bill, the legislature has a website that can be a little confusing to navigate, but it is mostly all there. You can type in the bill, see if your senator or representative has co-sponsored it. There's a list of petitioners under every bill. It will also list upcoming hearings on the website, but beware, I think they only have to give 48 or 72 hours notice for a hearing. So unless you're checking fanatically like me, multiple times a week, you could miss it. We'll try and let you all know when there's a hearing coming up. And there's also a great resource from a couple of years ago where some reps and senators went around the state to discuss energy issues with constituents and published a report that is available as well. As developed by the Committee on Global Warming and Climate Change back in 2017, 2018. So lots of good stuff there as well. So some of the challenges, I laid out the process here, but we are struggling against a few things, and not all of them are on this slide. So what's not on this slide, I'm not going to spend much time talking about the fossil fuel lobbyists or utility lobbyists who are fighting against renewable energy and fighting to keep us using gas or other fossil fuels. We'll cover that another day. But even in the legislature itself, the structure sometimes works against us, which is really why we need all of you. The legislature is set up to encourage incremental change. So that can be good sometimes, right? We don't want to necessarily switch things around depending on who gets elected every 2 years. But when we're dealing with a crisis, we saw this happen this last year with the coronavirus. Sometimes it's difficult for bold policy made quickly. It's just not the way our legislature is set up. On top of that, a lot of votes are taken without a roll call, meaning we don't know who voted which way, and sometimes even happen behind closed doors. So we don't even know necessarily in the legislature who is opposing these bills. Which is why it's really important that folks call their reps and try and get as many people on board as possible, because we don't always know what's happening there. And lastly, folks may already be aware of this, but the legislature is extremely centralized. So the Speaker of the House, currently Ron Mariano, he's been Speaker for less than a year, has a lot of control over what happens, what is added to the schedule, who is on what committee, and in many cases, what bills move forward and what bills die. I'll just add a quick note here that I think is just so important to be aware of. If you have a better position in the legislature, you actually make more money, sometimes double your salary in stipends. So whether or not you're in the speaker's favor can literally determine the amount of money you're bringing home to your family. It was pretty a good incentive to not cross him. And the previous speaker, Bob DeLeo, who left just this past year, was actually the longest serving speaker in Massachusetts history. He was a speaker for 11 years. He eventually retired. But so that is the process in summary. I think I am passing it now to Laura, right, to talk about how to make an impact in the process.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Biggs. I live in Watertown. I've been involved with the Sierra Club outreach team for just about a year now. And yeah, part of the reason climate change is such an important issue to me is that my family's from California, and just this past year when we had really kind of, some really bad wildfires, my grandparents had to evacuate their home. It was kind of a scary time, so yeah. All right, so I think right now what we're going to do is we're going to take another poll, which is going to be fun. So basically just answer, how do you like to communicate? What's your favorite way to reach people right now?
Just waiting for, we have 24 of 35 people. Almost there. Few last stragglers. Can't make up their mind. Going once, going twice. All right, close enough.
Oh, really? Huh. Interesting. That's cool. I was expecting everyone to see it in person. Maybe not yet. All right, so the point of the poll is really there's no wrong answers. They're all good answers. There's a lot of ways to get involved depending on what you feel your strengths are and what you're interested in, what your skills are. So just to share a couple of activities that I've been involved in with Sierra Club in this past year is that we were texting supporters to try to reach their legislatures to encourage them to support the climate roadmap bill. I was also involved in phone banking in the summer and the fall to try to get representatives who support environmental policies to get elected. And I have also met both my state rep and my state senator. And yeah, just to share personally about this process, I was a little intimidated to do it actually. I don't know what I was thinking. I was like, oh, they're probably like really busy and don't have time for me and all this kind of thing. But yeah, they responded and made a meeting, and I contacted them and along with some other constituents, and talked about climate policy. In addition, I've participated in the lobby day by the Mass Power Forward Sierra Club and other organizations as well. And what I realized after this thinking is that, your representatives owe you their support, right? Because you voted for them. And so I was in the right to contact them. So anyway, yeah. And also what I've kind of realized too is that not a lot of people are involved in state politics typically. And even if a representative gets even 5 to 10 phone calls on something, that can be something that really surprises them, because they don't typically hear from a lot of constituents, and it's very important. Okay, so go to the next slide. So, of course you can get involved in whatever activity that you feel you want to, but I think that it's important to be mindful that some activities definitely have more impact than other activities. So for example, meeting your representatives, calling your representatives is an activity that can have a bit higher impact than, so for, say, for example, sharing on social media, where your rep may not be aware that you're a constituent. You know, of course, building support, building communication among other supporters is also a great activity to do as well. Okay, next. All right, so now we'll go into some specific action steps that you can take. And yeah, one thing I want to connect here too is that, you know, from our first poll to our last poll is that, like, you know, the importance of kind of building political momentum, because, you know, we want to find solutions that are not just for, you know, one person, but really that are good for a whole state, and to kind of be leaders in this way. And so in that, you know, vein, we really suggest you to both meet and contact your representatives. It's really easy to find out who they are on the Massachusetts website if you don't already know. And you can ask them to co-sign the bill. Having them co-sign is important because it shows that they are publicly willing to support this bill. And it's important to have public support, as kind of Jacob was talking about earlier, because, you know, maybe if they don't have public support, you never know if they might get influenced by some lobbyist, or they might get influenced by, you know, whatever the speaker wants to do. And so having that public support is super important. You definitely email, you can tweet, lots of great activities to do. And also, of course, you know, we have the outreach team weekly meetings, and you can get involved in future activities such as this one, and you can volunteer like me doing this presentation. And Sierra Club also has an advocacy hour meeting where we catch up on other important campaign activities. And with that, I will pass it back to Jacob.
Thanks, Laura. And there are a few questions in the chat that I want to follow up on what you said about next steps here, but there's a few questions in the chat which I think are really good. I just want to quickly address. And that folks are asking how this bill compares to the roadmap bill, the next generation climate roadmap, something like that, that was passed earlier this year. That's a great question, and we probably should have named it a little more clearly in the slides. They are highly compatible. The way that I would describe them is the next generation climate bill sets up goals around emissions, right? So how much carbon is going into the atmosphere. This bill doesn't actually deal with emissions, it deals with energy sources. So what's the energy we're using instead, right? So if the roadmap sets up the goals, this bill sets up all the follow through. And we didn't go through a lot of the intermediate pieces in the bill that would actually allow us to switch over to renewable energies, renewable generation. But, you know, things like the renewable portfolio standard, and there are various ways to, you know, various very clear strategies, in fact, to switch off of what do you want to say, combustion engine vehicles, right? Those strategies already exist. This bill sets up a lot of the pieces to get there. So anyway, that's how they're compatible. So I'll just say from the top, one is the big picture goals, the roadmap is the big picture goals. This bill is the follow through to actually hit those targets and make sure that the legislature follows through on that. And let's see here. I want to just quickly, I'm gonna stop sharing screen for a second here, and just quickly follow up on what Laura said about next steps. There's a lot that you can do, and we'll be following up with many of you over email. But I want to make sure that if folks are interested in getting involved and want to be part of this team and the work that we're doing, that you have, if you want to get involved, be part of what this team is doing, I want to make sure you have the link to join our weekly team meeting. We meet at this time every week, Thursdays at 7. And this is our RSVP to next week's meeting. I'll drop that in the chat. Does anyone else on the team want to say any other quick words about next steps before we move fully into Q&A? Cool. All right, so I'm going to try and go through here the Q&A. And if folks would like to come off mute and ask questions, I would ask if you go to where it says reactions on the bottom right, there's an option. If you click that, you can click raise hand, and I'd love to call on people. So in the meantime, I can answer a few questions that are already in the chat. So the question about two things. First of all, is the speaker, someone private messaged me, is the speaker in support of this bill? And how do I find out if my representative is already a co-signer? Those are great questions, and I'm going to demonstrate very briefly if I can find the link.
I just threw the link in the chat, Jacob. If
Oh.
you're looking for the Find My Legislator, that's what I put at least in the chat.
Yes, that's the half of it, but that was great, Nicole. So if you go to the bill, the legislature's website, it's going to takes forever to load, but here we go. So here is the bill on the website. The bill number, there's a Senate and a House version. The House version is 2836. We share the Senate version as well. You can look at one for your reps and one for your senator. But where it says petitioners right here, so all I did was search this bill on the website, H2836. Clicked on petitioners, and here are the list of folks who have said they support the bill. And I believe that Nicole says around 60 people, though I'm looking like a bit more now. I'm not sure, I'm not good at estimating numbers. But you can go through this list, see if your rep is signed on. And if you don't know who your rep is, Nicole actually just dropped the link to that in the chat. So you can type in your address and fill out the little form. It'll tell you exactly who your rep and senator is. And you can see if their name is on this list. And I'm going to pass it to Sarah, who has her hand up.
Yes, Jacob. My senator is Will Brownsberger, who is also the president pro tempore in the Senate. And he once wrote to me that he cannot sponsor legislation due to his position. So I'm a little confused here when you say co-sign. Is that the same thing as sponsoring?
It is. It's a little technical. There's technically only one main sponsor, which is the people we showed in the slides, but everyone else can co-sponsor the bill.
Okay.
Occasionally, like Senator Brownsberger, some senators will say, "Oh, I don't do that." You can still ask them for their support. We really need them. The folks who say that are often the folks we need the most.
Okay.
Awesome. And there's some great questions in the chat. Steve Wenner asks, please share a list of all organizations endorsing the bill. I don't have that handy at my fingertips, but I'm happy to send that around. I believe it's quite a few organizations, more than I could name or remember quickly. And Vignesh, you put a great question in here. I'm wondering if you want to come off mute and ask that live. I just think it's a great one to ask if you're still here.
So I was going to ask, what are some organizations that are lobbying against this bill? And also, are there any senators who are getting money from them? Reps or senator?
Yeah, great question. So this bill, it's okay, let me say this a couple different ways. It's really interesting. A lot of lobbying in the legislature happens a little bit off the books, but there was a really great report that came out just a few months ago that cataloged some of it. And typically the groups that are lobbying against are groups, there's three that come to mind. There are groups like the Mass Petroleum Council, that's just a fossil fuel lobbying organization. They're totally shameless about what they lobby for. They have a ton of money and paid staff who show up and make relationships with legislators, donate to their campaigns. I don't have the list handy of what campaigns they donate to. Often legislators don't want their money because it doesn't look great, but they will take money from a way that's a little sneaky. take it from a friend or something like that, or from a personal donation, which is harder to track. There's also groups like Eversource and National Grid, so utility companies who probably many of us pay bills to Eversource and National Grid. Their business model is predicated on, in many cases, selling gas and electricity to consumers. And although they certainly could make money selling renewable energy, I'm not a business major, but switching up your business model adds a lot of uncertainty and risk. And I think they'd be much happier knowing that they can make enormous profits with what they're doing now than switching things up, even if it meant saving our planet. And the last group that comes to mind, folks, has anyone heard of the Associated Industries of Massachusetts? No, right? They fly under the radar a lot. So they're kind of a trade organization. I see, yeah, Mike in the chat, yeah. They're a kind of trade organization for really big business. So like think like Bank of America, like Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, big business. And they're not inherently, pro or anti-fossil fuels, but one of their biggest members is Eversource. And you have to think, if Eversource is, wants to keep us using gas far into the future, then AIM, the Associated Industries of Massachusetts, it's probably in their best interest as well. And their lobbyists have been on record opposing a lot of clean energy legislation in the past. So that was kind of a long answer. I hope that's what folks are looking for. And yeah, Mike, in the chat, if you're able to share that in the chat, that'd be wonderful. I see Faye has her hand up.
One of the things that exhausts people when trying to deal with the legislature is that they have, 6,000 to 8,000 bills a legislative session, and I've heard some of those bills are not even bills. They're already laws that have passed, or they overlap each other, or or you don't hear anything about them. They just kind of fall through the cracks. And I would really like to. You said that the roadmap was the framework. It was the big bill, and that this bill is how we're going to get there, how we're going to implement. Senator Barrett had sent out something where he, which I thought was great. He sent out deadlines for implementing different parts of the roadmap bill, and I'd like to know how that's different than this bill, because it just gets really confusing. You know what I mean? And we're not even, we got the roadmap. Governor Baker signed the roadmap, but we still have work to do to make sure that it's the real thing and not just talk. So, and you're saying, no, this bill is the real thing and not, do you know what I mean? Yeah, so please explain.
Definitely.
I'm just frustrated because it's been
a
few years I've been trying to deal with the legislature, and I just find it very frustrating, and I can't imagine, people, it's very hard to deal with all these things with the legislature,
Absolutely. So a couple of things. So I stand by what I said. The roadmap bill was a really, truly excellent first step. We needed to set those big picture goals to plan around, right? That's always step one. But when it comes to implementation, we really need to make sure we are pushing for the most aggressive implementation possible. And right now, the implementation is being led by Governor Baker's Department of Energy Resources and Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs,
Okay.
which is, that's their job. They're supposed to implement the laws that exist. However, although Governor Baker is not the most conservative Republican in America, he typically has not been in alignment with us on especially stuff like gas and getting decarbonizing buildings. So I'm still skeptical that he will fully carry out the law as written or to the level we need to meet the climate crisis. So this adds really clear-cut steps for the state to hit along the way. Strategies to actually transition to renewable energy and develop our clean energy workforce. It's not to say the governor couldn't do most of this on his own. He totally could. Is he likely to? Probably not. So I hope that answered your question, Faye. It's our way of holding our feet to the fire.
But what about what Senator Barrett put out? Because Senator Barrett,
Absolutely.
you know, I mean that's different than Baker. I agree with you about Governor Baker, but
so
I mean, why would we fight for this bill instead of looking at the deadlines? Like I think the first deadline is July, is next month.
Right.
So it's something in the roadmap.
It's a both and. So that bill, the S9 climate bill, was passed into law earlier this year. We're implementing it now. So there's a bunch of different regulatory processes, which are very complicated to follow. We're trying to participate in those regulatory processes, fight for the most aggressive implementation possible, while at the same time also fighting the legislature for similar aligned targets. Just because the implementation is ongoing doesn't mean it's going to happen the way we want. We're going to fight for it the way we want, right? Senator Barrett is sending out information about, submit a public comment about the implementation of the roadmap. There's going to be public hearings coming up, things like that. We absolutely need to participate in those and show up for those, and at the same time, fight in the legislature for something that's going to codify it and put it into law.
Okay, can I ask, since you supported the roadmap bill and you're supporting this bill, that would be so helpful if you kept us updated about both of those bills at the same time, because I can tell you it's extremely confusing. Right. I remember when the roadmap bill wasn't even passed and we were thinking about that. There were other people who were talking about and sending out a flurry of emails about another bill that Governor Baker had put forward that was dealing with how the agencies should respond to climate change. And it was very confusing. I didn't understand until a few months in that that's what the difference was, that he had introduced this bill about agencies as opposed to the roadmap bill. So I almost felt like he threw it in front of people, just to confuse them more, just to keep them away from, focusing on this roadmap. And so if you're involved if you're involved in the roadmap, implementing it, and you're also involved in this bill, I think it would be great if you could update people. I would be very appreciative of that.
Sure, I appreciate that, Faye. I'll see what we can do. I will definitely try and send stuff around, and appreciate that request. I want to circle back. I threw a few other questions in the chat that were really good. No, you're okay. There are a few other questions in the chat that are really good. I want to make sure they get answered before we get to 8 o'clock. But Jean asked, my reps are already supporting this. Is it worthwhile to contact reps who are now, even if they're not from, even if you're not from their constituency? Do they care if you're not voting for them? So great question. Probably not the best use of your time to contact reps who aren't your rep. They just have no incentive to care what you think. No offense. But if your rep is supporting the bill already, it's a great opportunity to ask them to double down. I like anytime you can get your rep or your senator to show support visibly for this, this type of legislation is excellent. There's a few ways they can do that, and there's other inventive ways I'm sure you can think of that also are good. So, ask them to post on their Twitter saying they support the bill. And ask them to write a letter to the editor to their local paper, or better yet, write it for them and say, would you submit this, stating your support for this policy. That kind of visible support really elevates the issue. It helps them, it makes them go on record, and makes them much more likely to actually support it in a crunch if they've taken some kind of action, visible action like that. So that's my answer to that question, Jean. And Steve had asked a question. I think I might have missed one here. So folks, please raise your hand if I missed you in the chat. But Steve said the roadmap bill sets net zero as a goal. This bill sets renewable as a goal with no offset. Is that a major difference?
Well,
So yes, it is it's a major difference. So really what we need eventually is to be net carbon negative, right? We're not really talking about that in this presentation, but we need to start at some point be pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, not just net zero. So net zero is an awesome goal. We need that goal, right? But what we really need is to have a clean energy economy where not only are we using clean energy, but we're actually sequestering more carbon than we're putting back into the atmosphere. So I think this bill is really great because it sets up that vision that actually goes beyond net zero. It will hit net zero on the way, but it sets up that really, really high bar. It's more in line with what we actually need, what's in the IPCC 2030 climate report. Do folks have any other questions for me or any of our other awesome presenters? Hard to believe not, seeing some of the commentary in the chat. And just to comment on some of the deadlines for implementing the roadmap bill, I'm not able to share that right now. I have it in my inbox, but I'm happy to send something around when we follow up from this. Any last questions before we close out? All right. All right, folks. Well, this was really, really great. And we didn't even go the full hour, which I'm actually shocked about. In my experience, folks are so chatty on Zoom, but I guess we're all a little worn out. So I just want to hear, whatever the Zoom version of applause is, you want to do snaps, you want to clap, just for our presenters here tonight, Laura, Nicole, Julian, and Ryan, who not only presented, but also made most of the presentation. And none of us have a background in renewable energy. So kudos, community outreach team is awesome. If you would like to be part of what we're doing, we meet once a week on Thursdays. I'm going to throw that link into the chat again to join our meeting. And we will send a follow-up either tomorrow or on Tuesday. We're taking the day off for Memorial Day. So you'll hear from us very shortly with some follow-up and next steps. And we may reach out to you again in the future to try and lobby your state representative. So if we reach out to you, we'd love your help. I think with that, we'll probably close.
Great. Awesome. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. This is so insightful. Bye.
Thanks, Megan.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to us.